Let's see. So we are doing a deal evaluation workshop. It really does hinge on a lot of like, it's a prompt and a scenario. And for those of you who are looking for a business to buy, you can kind of just be yourself. For those who maybe are adjacent to that, you can maybe put yourselves in the shoes of someone looking to buy. But also, if you are maybe a CPA or an attorney or or a lender, someone who helps deals get done, say be yourself and interject as like, hey, I think I have a solution to this problem, or here's my perspective on it. So that's how this will kind of go. We've not done something like this before. So show us a little grace if we're like, oh, that was unexpected. But, the point is like, we're going to learn from each other. We don't have like some, like, this is how to do it, beat it over your head as like, this is the process. And this is not a technical workshop, but I think you'll find it to be still valuable. Matt, is there anything you'd like to kind of say to
No, I just say thanks for coming out. I really appreciate it. It's nice to see so many people interested in acquiring a business, and I see a lot of familiar faces, which is good. And hopefully, like Joe said, I mean, there's infinite scenarios that you can run with, right? Because if you do this long enough, you see any and everything. And so I hope this is interactive. We want you guys to feel free to ask questions or chime in. It doesn't have to be a formal presentation, but thank you guys all for coming out. We appreciate it.
yeah. The other thing here is that, as we kind of do the scenario, I would say if you get to know, then at least say that. But then also like kind of come back to yes and just be like, no, this was dead the moment I saw it, right? Figure it out. So anyway, so we have a workshop. And I think the first thing, and I'm basically going to kind of walk through this packet and get to the part where we can kind of start discussing this deal together. And I'll be playing the role of kind of both moderator and also Gary, who owns Harpeth Valley Grounds Management, the target business.
Fictional, right?
Fictional. This is fictional. So they're like, so they obviously had an opinion about whether this deal was interesting. So here we have just kind of like your buy box, and just kind of some basic questions that you might ask. I would call these like your pre-LOI questions. And so as we kind of think about this deal, this isn't the buy box, but these are things that you might have. I think one of our points is that this is like, what's your minimum maximum SD? A deal will either fit within or without that.
Yep.
That's kind of the easy part. And you'll all have something that works for you and what your target is. Maybe it's industry specific, you're doing a roll up, maybe it's just a cash flow play for you. And so that's going to be your first pass.
I was talking to, I think it was Ben, key man dependency, right? So if we're talking about trades, you need to think about, it's a big issue with SBA lending right now, is who holds the license, right? Because that SBA lender is going to say, we need a copy of that license before closing. So how comfortable are you, or is there a certain dollar amount that you say, I'm not willing to go above $2 million because I don't want to sign my name on this because I can't get the license and I'm having to rely on this key person that has the license, right? So that key man dependency can be big. And then another one I wanted to highlight, Joe, is just down payment is so big. That's often the limiting factor in these deals. So when you're thinking about your buy box and your SDE range and your purchase price range, SBA said if you're going to use SBA, you got to come up with 5% down payment cash at a minimum. And if you do that, you got to have a 5% seller note on full standby. So that's going to help guide the purchase price range. Okay. So your first call with a lender, whether it's me or somebody else, they're going to look at your PFS and see, okay, if you're trying to buy a $5 million company and you have $200,000 in cash, you're not going to have a lot of wiggle room there, right? You're not going to have any post-closing liquidity. So that's going to be really key, looking at how much down payment and then post-closing liquidity as well.
Yep. So for today's deal, Harpeth Valley Grounds Management, there's some kind of basics on the next page. And this is owned by Gary. I've been operating this business for 17 years. It's pretty classic landscaping. I've got some HOA contracts. I've got 14 folks. Last 12 months of revenue was 3 million. I had someone help me with the SDE. They told me it was 495. And look, I want to retire. I've been doing this a long time. And so my asking price, I think, is very fair at 2.1 million. And I hear people want to have a deal like this that is recurring revenue, contracts, industry that's like simple operations. And so 2.1 million is my asking. I think it's pretty fair. I want to retire. I care about the employees and who buys it. So like I want to make sure, the buyer's not just going to kind of rip up what I've done, but I'm not going to take a lower offer. Like I know what I've got. It's a great business. Tons of people are going to want to buy it from me.
especially in this market.
Yeah. There are some other things that make it attractive. So some of the kind of like questions about customer concentration, key man fleet on next page. So Matt, do you want to kind of touch upon the highlights and like, is this
Yeah.
lendable?
Yeah. So, I mean, every bank is going to have kind of industries they prefer or industries they don't prefer, right? In a lot of those, it's a gray area, right? So it's kind of depends on the buyer, depends on the specific business. But this type of landscaping company, commercial landscaping, is pretty attractive. It's definitely something that we would lend on, and you can kind of see here some of the highlights. So they've been around 17 years. A lot of recurring revenue, which could be good. Something you need to think about, right, is making sure that stays intact. So like your attorney, we got one in the room, at least one, Nancy, hey, does this need to be a stock purchase or an asset purchase, right? That's also part of deal evaluation, is what type of deal are you doing? But yeah, just on the surface, like what makes it attractive, you got some diversification in your revenue and your accounts. There's no noteworthy customer concentration, so there's no one customer that's making up a big chunk of the revenue, which is always good. Clean balance sheet, there's not a whole lot of CapEx, with this type of business, new truck every now and then. But
So you'd lend?
yeah, I mean, yeah, we would pre-qualify this deal, and yeah.
Any other lenders in the room that like have an opinion so far on lendability? No? Okay. Need to know more.
Curious, looking at the SD, the asking price.
Yep.
Multiple. Then you look at a lot of deals, like what is the number that you're looking for where you're like, SBA loan will cash flow. This deal will cash flow with.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a kind of a nuanced question in some ways, because most banks, the way they underwrite it is they're going to bake in a salary for the buyer, right? So we try to establish on a deal this size, you try to establish what's the SDE. So we're going to add back all of the seller's compensation, but then we're going to ding the cash flow for a salary for the buyer. So sometimes a deal can be financeable for one buyer and not for another, right? There's sometimes like you can make a deal work by building in zero salary for the buyer, right? But I always tell my buyer, like, if you can't afford to pay yourself anything, why are you buying this business, right? Because that's kind of the whole point typically. So yeah, I mean, as far as multiples, if you use kind of the basic like 10% down, $75 to $100,000 for the buyer, usually like a 3.5 or 4x multiple is the top end. Like it's not going to cash flow at a higher multiple than that typically. Most banks are trying to get like 1.25 debt service coverage ratio. SBA says, you can go down to 1.15, but it's a little tight. So usually around 4, you get over that and it starts getting, you got to have a larger down payment or a seller note on full standby or something to make it cash flow.
Who's interested in this business? Does it meet anyone's buy box? Brad? Patrick? Okay, Patrick. So like, what's good, what's bad? Sorry to put you on the spot because I know you. Okay. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Yeah. Is there like an amount that just like too much? So if I was like, all right, there's about maybe like across all my equipment. Look, I'm the seller, right? I don't really 3 to 5,000, Patrick. It's not a big deal. It's what are you fretting about it?
You're maybe not realize value, but like equipment, trucks, stuff, I take that off. Yes, you're actually operating.
Yeah.
It's going to impact your cash flow. Like
Yeah. So landscape. Yeah, that's fair.
Definitely a fair
Yeah.
point. I mean,
Do you think the asking price? Sorry, it was Chris. Or the asking price too much at 2.1 million? I still think that. You think it's high? Okay. Okay.
I looked up. So my favorite first move on Search Finder is anytime I saw go in and go to deal stats, and I pull the last like 10, and I pulled them.
Yeah. 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 Okay.
There were a couple that surpassed 4, but I was pretty.
So you're coming in maybe like 1.5 if you're interested still.
Yeah.
Okay.
I say it's a little bit on the high side, but I would also say depending on what level of depreciation they have,
Yeah.
it probably needs to be a CapEx expense to discount the cash flow
Okay.
to offset that.
essentially what you're saying, but just discounted it in a different way. But I think the biggest piece of it is what kind of a salary does the buyer have to have? Like, it's a good thing to say, hey, I only need 150, but
Yeah.
you got to look at the numbers and see why you need 150. Like,
Yeah.
if you're vested into what the income ratio
Yeah.
is, then that's more of a determinant of does 150 make sense? If a smaller number of what makes sense, then just from
Yeah.
that standpoint, you want to err on the side of caution, but at the same time, allow your buyer to make good judgment.
Okay.
Credit is going to always say, well, the numbers say you need $200,000.
Yeah.
So that buyer is not a fit to buy the business, especially not at this price.
Yeah.
I would say somebody that has outside income, other investments or something, is somebody that's closer to being able to buy something at this price point than just it's standing on its own.
Okay. Okay.
It's a good point.
Any other?
It would be the
Yeah.
fact that we put it at a 4.2 multiple in here. So
Hey, everyone always tells me that I should sell my business and it's worth a lot. And like, I hear multiples of 4 and 5. You know, I heard a guy that also owned a landscaping, someone bought him for 5 or 6. So like, I think I'm being super reasonable. This thing runs itself. Like, it's not hard. I don't, yeah.
5 EBITDA multiple is pretty reasonable.
Sure. So Daniel, I see. Yeah. Yeah.
Multiple range you were doing it on.
Yeah,
Your EBITDA was
Yeah.
I did at the
Fine,
EBITDA. That's what was in that sheet.
Yeah. Yeah.
so you're at 3.5 on SDE.
Yeah.
I do 3.25 to 3.5, and most of what I saw was between 0.5.
Yeah. So let's say, okay, I'll share some financials with you because, you know, you're interested, you need to know more. Maybe my EBITDA comes out to maybe like 250,000 now. You know, I pay myself pretty well off the profits, which is why you should buy this. So let's 250,000 EBITDA. Are you now thinking that the price needs to come lower now too, or?
No, if that's
Yeah.
true. I mean, that's assuming I can
Yeah.
find it.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
gotta include that realistic replacement.
Yeah. So far you want to know, as part of this evaluation, you want to know the EBITDA. You also want to know the depreciation because you don't really want to factor that in. You also want to know that someone else can run it. If you were in landscaping already, does that now change your math?
Yeah.
Like, I guess, Connor, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So if this was like a printing business, for example, would that now change kind of some of the conversation that we're having about how much the owner compensates themselves and the multiple?
Yeah, I mean, you're acquiring.
Yeah.
Presumably, you don't have to draw
Yeah.
salary from the SBA.
Yeah. 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 And so for me as a seller, and like, if I'm looking over here and Brad and Patrick are telling me about depreciation and these multiples, and then you've got to like bring in somebody. It's like, well, I know someone bought some other landscaping company, was in landscaping at 5-6 times and they didn't bat an eye. So like, I'm not budging on my number. Sounds like you guys are, sounds like you don't know what you're talking about. But no, it's fair. Yeah. No, for sure. So like, yeah, sure.
So I think
Yeah. It's a good point. So I like that. So I guess transitioning now from like, I'm talking about the finances. So it sounds like I think I see this as for like a lot of buyers. I think this makes sense. It's like the first pass is just the financials. Like, do you trust it? Are we in the ballpark on price, right? Any other kind of big qualifications? Like, as people who are interested in buying a business here or have seen a lot of deals, what are some of the other things that you're looking at right away that are some of your pre-LOI? I'm either in or out.
I would say knowing more details about the accounts.
Yeah.
It shows that 43 accounts
Yeah.
and none are over 18%.
Yeah.
But 18 is right at that 20% threshold. So
Mm.
we're talking about a fifth of your revenue
Yeah.
because the seller's going home. So I'd want to know more around the time frame.
Yeah. Would you walk away at this point if like? Yeah. Okay. It's a question for sure. Yeah. Nancy?
Make it soundable.
Okay.
Make it sound those stuff.
Yep.
Well, it'll be fine because I have a personal relationship with I know all my customers. Like they'll sign over. Like I'll introduce you. I'll do a warm handover. They've been with me for years, and so I don't see any reason why they would. You're gonna lose them.
Yep. Well, and I've got a landscaping. This is kind of a lot of this is based on a real deal. The numbers are slightly different and all, but there's a landscaping company in another state, and when you start thinking about this recurring revenue as a buyer, you start thinking about, well, do I want something in this APA, in this purchase agreement that is tied to retaining those contracts, right? And that, you're starting to think about balancing, mitigating that risk with also winning the deal, right? Because it's a lot of competition out there. If any of you are searching, that there's a ton of searchers, right? And a lot of them, maybe they're not as savvy as kind of some of the stuff we're throwing out, and maybe it's because they're strategic, or maybe they just have a lot of cash they need to burn, but you're competing with those people. So you're having to balance the priorities of like, I want to win this deal, but I also want to mitigate as much risk as I can. So that could be another thing to think about is, are you going to put some requirements on those contracts staying in place for a certain period of time?
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you structure that?
Well, the one I'm doing right now, I mean, we can't give legal advice, right? But we can tell you if it's SBA compliant or not, and that's the biggest thing. We're and then it's just a question of like, does underwriting feel like it is mitigating the risk, right? On this particular deal, the buyer, he was originally going to have a 12-month period where a certain portion of the sales proceeds would go into escrow and be held by a neutral third party. And if the business didn't hit certain EBITDA metrics, then he would get a portion or all of it, depending on what happened. And actually, the seller agreed to it, which was kind of surprising. But it was you open up a whole can of worms. I mean, I'm sure Nancy could chime in, because then you have to determine, okay, well, how much is each expense line item or category allowed to vary from the historicals, right? Because the seller doesn't want to release that money if it's your fault because you're a terrible operator, right? And the opposite is true as well. So it's an escrow type thing that needs to be talked out early,
It's in an SPA structure, right? Like if you said, hey, like I'm going to hold this, call it 20% of this revenue is concentrated here. I'm going to hold back 50% of the seller note, and if that cut stays at the end of 12.
It depends on like the biggest issue, I think. I mean, I'd be curious to hear. I see you looking at Nancy. So different banks may view it different ways. Like, we're okay with it on this deal. If the money goes back to the buyer, then we would require him to pay it down on the loan, because we don't want it to jack with like, now it looks like you've injected less money. So, I mean, it's really the same for the buyer though, right? He got the money, it reduced the loan. So I think it depends on, how it's structured, but we don't hold the escrow. We would say we don't want to be a part of that for a lot of different reasons, but
you can't do just like straight earn out.
you cannot do an earn out.
Bank funds, like the bank funds.
Yeah, you could do it either way. Like in the deal I'm doing, part of the sales proceeds they're supposed to go to the seller are going into escrow. Yep. Yeah, you can.
Except right under seller note.
What does that mean?
Yeah. Like if this doesn't happen, I reduce the seller note. If this doesn't happen, I reduce the seller note. If each contract that doesn't renew, we're going to reduce the seller note by the average contract amount over the last 3 years. So I'm going to come up with a formula to formulate on each client that doesn't. That, again, they've got to continue. If they lose, if they're lost, then we'll have a reduction to a certain amount, whatever the seller's pain threshold is, because at some point they're going to have a pain threshold that they're going to cut.
Chris.
I would say, and I do a lot of escrow agreements because, like in the accounting practice industry, like sellers just won't do a seller note, but they want a really short payout, so it just doesn't work for people to do it on the seller note side. But I wouldn't tie the escrow agreement to EBITDA. I would tie it to revenue.
Yeah.
Because you can tie it back to the client. Like, I mean, a buyer can fixate expenses to a point where they make it where it doesn't work. And then the funds are going to always have to go back to the bank to pay the loan down.
Yeah.
Never go back to the buyer.
Could you explain what an escrow agreement is?
So the escrow agreement is essentially taking part of the funds from closing. So the seller is not getting a portion of their proceeds, and they're going into an escrow account to be held for a period of time that's defined in the purchase agreement. And there are certain targets that are required to make it. Well, whether it's client retention, whether it's going to be a revenue multiple, whatever the case may be, it's going to be tied to that and specific in the purchase agreement for closing.
Right.
So that when that time gets there, it's going to be a review between the bank, the buyer, and the seller to say, okay, we all agree, and then everybody signs off on it before let's go either way.
And correct me if I'm wrong, because I just want to make not everyone's familiar with like an escrow agreement. The reason why this works is because it's fully funded. The purchase price is fully funded. So it's not, oh, this is an earn out of the business
Correct.
performance. It's, I'm paying the money into this escrow and it sits there. And then we evaluate whether that gets dispersed back to the seller as like, hey, business performed great. Here are the funds. Or it goes back to the buyer of, well, I was a little worried about these contracts coming over. Historically, $200,000 of contracts didn't come over to me. So that escrow money is coming back to me now. So
For seller protection in that. I'm assuming there's language incorporated in there because if the new owner doesn't do all the things that you did from an operational standpoint, in other words, pay those contracts, where's the seller? Sometimes I go in there and escalate. In the event that there's any sort of issue, I've got the opportunity to seller to come in and cure. I get so much notice and I've got a certain amount of time that you can come in and try to facilitate the lien or whatever the underlying issue is, there's going to be a cure right.
So this is a good place to start kind of maybe transitioning into the second part of this. But for this deal, is there any other kind of like key criteria that anyone else is like, I would want to check this or that or anything else that like, Jamie? Yeah. At least the building month to month. Yeah. Brad.
How are people paid and how are you paid? More or less.
Mm,
That one worries me.
yeah. I don't have a great scenario answer for you. That is a
Good way to verify it, and then you start looking
Yeah.
at the liability risk, especially
Yeah.
especially if the contract's
Yeah.
and you're doing a stock deal, I'd be out.
For the purposes of this evaluation, what I would say is it's a great question. You may only find out about that until later, until it's like, hey, Brad, either make me an offer if you're interested, or and then like go find it. And we're going to put it in an offer. But I think the takeaway so far is that, like, I think the complicated stuff was like, do we do an escrow agreement? Like, what are these clauses? What are we going to inspect? But it's essentially like I have criteria. I can look at comps and like do evaluation and like this is what it's worth to me. I'm gonna make an offer, right? Like we can kind of get to LOI, yes or no, and some range, right? So I'm gonna start handing these out. Let's see, 5. And essentially what we're going to do is say that we are now, I know there's like hair for people on this deal, but essentially we want to buy and we're going to offer 2 million. Maybe you have some other clauses in mind of like this or that escrow arrangement agreement or other things that you're like, I need to make sure that we qualify. But essentially, like maybe you're a landscaper, you know, this is a great pickup for you, you know, the client base and you want to make this deal work. Yeah.
And I'll
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
safe, you know, from the bank. So I think that's a really good question. Some
Yeah.
have a relationship where like, well, yeah, and that's maybe benefits that we don't want to talk about. But
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good question. I think that I think that's really tough to check. I know the banks are not going to like that.
Well, it's got to be on the tax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is, so let's say we're a motivated.
Right.
So that is going to be yeah. So that might be a thing, especially in like landscaping where like you meet, like I might tell you like, hey, look, these numbers are all true. But let me tell you something. A lot of my clients have been with me for a long time. I'll do a nice transition with you. They pay cash. I didn't value it on that, but you'll get paid cash. Look, do with that what you will. But I will say, at least in this case, like I'm being reasonable. I'm not, like you might think my multiple is high, whatever it is, but I think I have a popular industry. I don't think this is crazy. And I'm also I'm not asking you to value it off of, trust me, like people will just give you cash. But let's say you're a motivated buyer. Let's say you're going to put in an offer of $2 million. You like the business. Now you're doing diligence. Now this is where, like, I don't have an answer in the scenario for like the cash flow and the payroll part of it, but now you get to check for the things. And so we've outlined a few issues that have come up. I'm going to walk through them real quick. I'm not going to walk through the questions that we have outlined, but it's, you know, these are things that you now are going to have to start to think about as the buyer. So equipment, like you're going to get all the equipment, but you know what? The F-150 that my business belongs to, sorry if this wasn't clear, I just thought it was obvious, but that F-150 is mine. So I still want you to, you know, pay the same price, but you know, that 87 grand, that truck's coming with me. You don't need it. Don't worry about it. The lease. So I think Tammy, you asked about the lease. Was it good? Yeah. My lease is month to month now that you're seeing the lease agreement. Now, this creates a problem for you because the SBA doesn't like, they need a 10-year lease. So now you have a lease issue that, and the landlord is not willing to change their terms. They're part of this deal now, but hey, this is how I want to run my business and this is how I want to lease it. This deal has nothing to do with me. I'll find a new tenant. And finally, the last issue is the timing. Hey, we are buying, what do we say? We're going to buy around October. So the busy season's kind of over. So all that cash that you're going to be counting on to come in at the end of the year, right after you buy it, it's a seasonal business and you're going to be buying after a lot of the main cash flow. So these are the three issues. So this kind of like has some of the questions, or like kind of outlines the three big things. But essentially now we like this business fundamentally as this buyer in this scenario now. Like it adds on to our current business. This just fits our geography perfectly, and we feel like it'll cash flow over time, whatever the case may be. But now we have these three issues: my truck that I'm taking with me, a lease that isn't SBA compliant, and we're kind of buying at the end of the year. And I'll tell you what, I'm not going to give you exclusivity to just sit on this till it gets busy again. So now this is kind of the challenge, and kind of as we're getting to our point here, which is, are you going to walk? Is anyone just like sees these issues is just going to walk away? Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But the lease is a hard one because storing the vehicles and everything, like you just don't find that every day. So you can't just say, well, I'll find another space.
And for some of you, like, you may think, these things wouldn't pop up. These things and more will pop up, right? They will. And I think sometimes I know certain brokers, I can't speak for you, but I know some brokers, if you try to retrade on price, you're out. They're done. You are done.
Yeah.
It's over. They will go take it to the next buyer. So you have to balance that with, I guess one of the things that I want you guys to take away from this is, are you really wanting to buy a business, or are you just kind of flirting with it? Right? Because some of these issues are going to pop up, right? And if you don't have enough liquidity, or if you're not convinced that you can operate this business, then, maybe save yourself some time and money, and don't start down that road, right? Because these things are going to pop up. So you got to be convinced that you can operate it, right?
Just into each year of like back to that idea, your initial offer.
Yep.
I love that caveat. I'm still negotiable at my price.
Right.
You gotta expect anything.
True.
I also think you have to if a deal is listed for $2.5 million or whatever,
Yep.
for $1.5 million, nobody's going to give you any time. So I think you have to weigh it out when you make your initial offer. And I don't know to what extent you can sort of gauge willingness to negotiate once we have an accepted LOI. But like these, at least the first two items I think are very those to me are like easy things to trade on. It's just like, okay, in order to get this loan, I have to negotiate with the landlord. So I need access to the landlord. I have to get a new lease in place, but it's going up. It's going to be double. Like we're going to recast the historical based on a lease expenses double. And that, how could a seller, push back on that? Any buyer is going to ask about it, unless you're just trying to, buy something, or you don't need the lease because it's an expansion. Yeah. So anyways, I just think that the first two reasons are good reasons to retrade. I think the third is like why you need post-close liquidity. Maybe you need more for this business than a non-seasonal business. And like maybe your lender could come through and give you a nice little $250,000 line of credit to go along with the acquisition to help with that as well.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to steal your thunder or go a different direction, but on the particular deal that I'm working on, so I think pretty much every one of these things happened in some way, shape, or form. With the equipment, it wasn't that he wanted to keep the F-150, and it wasn't that some of them have debt that wasn't disclosed. But what happened, the buyer wanted to go out and perform an inspection, have a company go do an inspection of the equipment, and there was so much deal fatigue on the seller side that he said, number one, I don't want to have somebody there on a Sunday for you to come and do that. Number two, I don't care what you find. I'm not changing anything in the agreement. No purchase price, nothing. And there were indemnifications or reps and warranties in the contract already that stated that all equipment had to be in good working order. So the broker was telling the buyer, look, you're technically protected anyway, which maybe was true. I don't know. I'm not an attorney, but another point of like some of this stuff, you're going to get to a point in the process where there's a lot of deal fatigue and where you're not going to have as much negotiating leverage potentially. On the lease, we ran into that issue too. On this particular deal, the property is actually zoned residential that they operate out of. The seller owns the real estate. The real estate is not for sale. The seller is going to provide a 10-year lease, but at any point during that lease, the city or municipality could come in and say, this is not zoned properly. You can't operate this business here. So the buyer had a provision listed in the lease that said that if that occurs, if they get it in writing, they can present it and they're no longer bound by the terms of the lease. I was able to get our underwriting team comfortable with it because we pulled some comps and showed that there's lots of other similar spaces available at similar lease rates. But I think it depends on the type of business, right? Like if you're operating a restaurant or something that's really location dependent, that probably won't work, right? With a landscaping company, it's not retail focused most cases. So we were able to kind of work around it.
So
Go ahead. Yeah.
Nancy, do you want to chime in on something?
Real estate on this is real. I just had one where the sellers had their cars in business. They were on leases. There was still a balance left on the leases. The buyer was like, cars. Like, I mean, you got to pay them off at closing.
Yeah.
Pay all assets at closing. And we're like,
So yes. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So I'm going to start kind of moving this, kind of want to land this plane. So we still have plenty of time. So feel free to chime in. Say we inspect cash flow and the payroll and it's fine. Is there anything in here that has fundamentally changed the performance of the business? Like say we look at the SDE is fine and it's still like it earns cash, contracts are in place. Let's say they're assignable. Like these three things are really the main issues that we have now that we've submitted an LOI. Is this still fundamentally a strong business?
At my price yet.
At your price, yeah, at your price. Yeah. So whatever price we offered and valued it at, is it still like fundamentally performing the same? Like, have we discovered something that's just materially different? No. I would argue no. Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah. And so let's say I might just pick some folks because so Kenesha, right?
Kenna?
Yeah. Kenna, sorry. Let's suppose you are another landscaper in this area and you've put in this offer. How badly do you want this business? You're another landscaper. You know this area.
Tired of competing
You
with.
kind of want it, right? So like maybe these things to you that have come up are not as big of a deal. And maybe because like you really want it, it makes a lot more sense. Maybe you are actually the person who's offering the 2 million. Daniel, maybe you're just an individual. Maybe you are just Daniel and you're like, I saw this. I don't want it that bad. It's a good business. And so then I think this factors into, oh, good. Yeah. Yeah. So some of these things are kind of like, yeah. Yeah.
Is she's working?
Yeah. Yeah.
Their cash flow is.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the same. And so, and the thing this goes back to kind of what John was pointing out is what is your strategy for the offer that you're submitting? Because I think that might be a case where you're making that decision of like, I want to have it under LOI first at a higher price. And then maybe I retrade based off of like, hey, we discovered something different. I'm not getting this truck. It should be lower. That's a reasonable ask. But maybe for Daniel, the better answer is, I'm going to offer 1.2, 1.5. Maybe Kenna will get in a higher offer, but also like if these things are a problem, they'll remember I'm still around. I made an offer, right? And so that kind of impacts your strategy because I think a lot of these things here are more about how badly do you want it as you enter into that negotiation and what's it worth to you? And can you bridge these on deal terms versus, well, it's still more or less the same business that you saw. Now, that's all. There's going to be times when you find things that just blow it up and it's because it's different. But
If you got, let's just say that most
Yeah.
people in the room are interested in the business.
Yeah.
So you're going at a higher price, kind of get out the LOI, then you try to retrade. Chances are you don't have that chance because of the other interest in the business. They're going on to somebody else.
Yeah.
And so I think in a scenario like this, you've got a better chance coming in with a more realistic offer and explaining the why versus going in higher just trying to win. Now, you having a landscaping company, you could go in at a higher price
Yeah.
and honor that because of the fact that you don't need the lease.
Yeah.
need a lot of the other expenses.
Yeah.
Yes, on the salary. So your SDE is automatically higher because you're changing versus
Yeah.
purchase. But the thing you have to think about with landscaping is that's seasonality. So even if the contract's in place, you gotta look at what are the winter months look. And so you gotta have cushion in there to be able to cover that because you're probably gonna ask the bank for work capital to cover that period.
Yeah.
Well, some cash flow cushion at a 1.4, 1.6, but if you're at 2.1, you're already on the high end with no ability to get any additional work capital based on cash flow.
Now, the other thing that, and I've seen this this came up in this same deal, you don't want to miss the forest for the trees, especially if you're relying on that seller for help, like post closing. If you need to have a good working relationship with him or her to introduce you to these clients, right? Because you want to retain them, you have to manage that while at the same time handling the retrade and all these discussions and all these negotiations, and that really came into play big time on this deal. We had the buyer kind of arguing over, a few $1,000s worth of what he was going to pay the seller during this transition period. And it was getting to the point where the relationship was getting so contentious that I said, look, he's not going to want to help you post closing. And how much does that change things? Cause I'd rather you pay him a little bit more if that makes him happy so he can stay on post closing for up to a year, which is the SBA rule, versus you kind of burning this bridge, right? So that's another thing you need to think about. The last thing I was going to say is on the structure, right? I've got a different deal right now that I'm working on that is a restaurant. It's very seasonal. They do like a lot of catering and a lot of it's around the holidays, right? So we're looking to close July 2nd. So what we did is his revenue really comes in like around Thanksgiving, Christmas, a little bit around Easter. So we're setting it up to where the first 3 months are interest only, right? Your bank can do that, right? You just have to know to ask, or you have to have a lender that knows, okay, hey, why don't we set this up? So of course we're still going to give you some working capital, but this is going to help you get to your revenue months. So
Same thing with the seller note. So about
Yep.
years,
Yep.
stand by on the seller note. So the interest that he,
Yep.
but,
Yep.
but it helped me feel a little bit better about the cash.
Yep.
I bought it in July. See how much like this,
So that solves the timing piece. We've got at least a little bit of a solve there for, what did we say? For,
I don't know. I think different people have different thoughts on it,
and then potentially retrade on price for the vehicle. Are there any other options that people have seen for dealing with like equipment that owners want to take, or there's a note on it? No? What's that? Yeah. Yeah.
You could even potentially, I mean, it depends on, is the truck really used for work purposes or not? You know what I mean? Like if it's just the business has been paying for it, but it's his personal truck, well, okay, it's probably not going to affect your capacity to your efficiency. And maybe if it is involved in the business and he wants to keep it, then go get a quote for a new truck and we can maybe roll that in with the purchase of the business and we close them simultaneously.
Yeah.
You could do that. But you got to handle, do you want to reduce the price or not?
Yeah. Any other questions, comments? So we'll kind of start to wrap up on this, kind of what the point I've been trying to drive home is. Any other kind of things that people like need to know about the business that's going to like be a big deal for their evaluation? Yeah.
The comparison between us and
Yeah.
two different types of buyers. Earlier you said, well, I've got an operator, I'm not that involved, right?
Yeah.
How do you look at that from the lending side when the seller has an operator?
They all seem to be absent. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and so we kind of, yeah. So I mean, yeah. So we kind of like, I mean, I think as lenders, like we always hear that, right? And so it depends on like if the whole story kind of, I mean, we never know for sure, and you'll never know for sure until you buy it. That's one of the risks, But if the story as a whole makes sense, the guy lives in a different state, he's 80 years old, whatever, then okay, he probably is pretty absentee. But it depends, right? I mean, I think it really comes into play with like, can you replace whoever's really running it? Can you replace them, or are you going to keep them on staff? Or if they leave, can you run it without them? Like that's really the question.
Is the answer to that question determining your deduction from SDE to the operator, or
It can.
just using a number and it doesn't matter?
It's
situational, I guess, is the better way to.
I mean, that's where, you're approving a deal one way typically. And then sometimes things change in underwriting, right? Where this deal I was working on, the seller has a landscape architect license. The He has an employee on staff that has the landscape architect license. The buyer can't get that license. And he thought he was going to inherit this employee that had that license. Well, that employee left about 2 weeks before closing. Not to go to a competitor, but he left. All right. So then the question the question is, was the business really relying on that? Was it required to have that license to do their jobs? And what we found was that it wasn't required, right? And so the question then is, well, is that how they're advertising? Is that how they're getting jobs? Is like consumers are seeing, oh, you're the only company that has the landscape architect license. I want to go with you guys. We didn't feel that was the case. The buyer didn't feel like that was the case. So, and he plans to replace him with a landscape architect. So we move forward. But those are the types of decisions you got to be ready to make, right? And you don't always know them until the very end.
And I think too, like there's only so many times with credit that you can have story changes. Like I've been a deal done, and I say, hey man, I got an operator, and then that's the story that you're telling credit, and I come back, hey, no, the operator's gone. I'm gonna be ready.
Right.
Like the whole story,
which could change the deductions or whatever. Right. Right.
So I really credit Matt for kind of the way we've structured this workshop and the point of it, because when I asked Matt, where I was like, okay, we'll do deal evaluation at Old National Bank. I was like, what are we how do you want to teach deal evaluation? And I think where we landed and where Matt kind of guided this towards was that a lot of the buy box stuff of, is this a business that I want to buy? Yes, no, your business attributes, the financial attributes. You'll use your own quantitative, qualitative reasoning to get to no, pass, yes, not this price, yes, I have to have it. That is kind of the easier part to deal evaluate, because you'll have this list of questions and criteria and you are either checking the box or not. The really hard part is that now you have there's a bit of a trust issue now that you've made an offer, and it's like, I want to keep this truck. But yeah, that employee is kind of pretty important. Or, my spouse does a lot of work in the business that I don't pay them for, and they're not staying. And so those are the kinds of things that, as you're trying to drive towards close, is the evaluation part of how important is this? Does this break the model? And then the other big takeaway that we had was that I think what you saw is the bank can help you. You want to have a good partner. An attorney can help you with different options and how to structure this. So how do you bridge these things if it's not truly, if it's still fundamentally a deal you want to have good partners in your network to help you evaluate, can we still do this? Does this still make sense? Assuming that you don't have just a total trust breakdown. And I think having good partners that can be like, oh, well, we could try to do this, can help prevent some of the fatigue too. And so that's kind of the tougher part, because you're going to be at this stage and it's just like, man, I got to negotiate this little thing, and I'm going to spend hours on this vehicle. Just use it or don't, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the tougher part. And the bigger point is you need good partners. And so Matt, thanks for making that the point. And please take us home.
No, I look, I appreciate the kind words, but I think it was a cool exercise, and I credit Joe for really helping add some structure, because I kind of get on these tangents and I get going down a rabbit trail. But no, I hope it was helpful, guys.
Yeah.
And we got a few more minutes if you guys want to hang out or talk about some of the issues or grab some more food. And
not everyone here is a searcher, so definitely kind of network, and this is kind of part of this ecosystem that we're trying to build, which is there are smart people in here if you're not buying a business who can help you solve some of these problems. So they're all in this. A lot of them are in this room right now. So thanks everyone, and see you next quarter.